two, one, two, three.
Hello and welcome to Ithaca DSA Presents. I'm Theresa Alt. I'm here today with Michael Demo. He's the chair of the Labor Committee of Ithaca Democratic Socialists of America, Ithaca DSA. We're going to be talking about labor issues today, not which union is about to strike or is which union is deep in contract negotiations, but rather we will be talking about a couple of local legislative issues, one in Tompkins County and one in the city of Ithaca. Michael Demo, what is being considered by the Tompkins County Legislature?
The Tompkins County Legislature is looking at proposals to establish a local minimum wage. And this would raise the minimum wage above the New York State wage, which is $16 an hour. Some proposals have, concepts of plans have been as high as the living wage, which is currently $25.08. But currently, the legislature is beginning with a study that they've funded. They voted to fund this study last year. And it's looking into the potential economic effects of raising the minimum wage.
Maybe you can say a little more about this study. What are they? Well, they're looking into the effects. How are they doing that?
They're doing that by primarily looking at numbers. Some of the numbers they look at are cost data, so the costs that are experienced by workers. They can find out from federal sources what the median rent is for a one-bedroom, for instance. They can also find out through commercial sources how people are spending their money and what sorts of expenses they're facing to pay for groceries and things like that in our community. What else are they going to say about the study? Oh yeah, the other main sort of way they're gathering information for this study is through public input. So they've had a series of convenings. There's been a workers convening. There's been a teen workers convening. There have also been several convenings for different sorts of employers, businesses, farms. And these are, convenings where people can come together and give their input to the researchers regarding current wages, costs of living, costs of doing business, and how a wage increase might affect their lives or their businesses. They have just concluded the series of convenings, but there's still an opportunity if viewers are interested to put in their own views about wages and cost of living in the Ithaca area through a web portal. Maybe we can put the link in the description.
Is it the kind of link you can say, with words that you can actually pronounce?
I wish, but it's a very long link, unfortunately.
Oh dear.
It's on a Cornell webpage because Cornell ILR Co-Lab is the one conducting the study on behalf of the county.
Okay, so perhaps what people should do is look for Cornell University Industrial and Labor Relations Co-Lab, and then look for the study and the link for communicating with the study.
Yeah, they should be able to easily find that through Google.
Okay, good.
I was part of the work convening recently, and it was a really meaningful event. A lot of us who have experienced hardship of low wages were able to put in our input regarding what that's meant to us, what that's meant to our coworkers, to people's families in the area, and how that's impacted our community in general. I mean, we have a situation where about half of Tompkins County workers are earning less than a living wage. Of course, about 30% of the city of Ithaca is poor. One thing that we've heard a lot from businesses is concerns about demand. The demand for businesses on the commons, foot traffic is down 20% this year, which is kind of catastrophic. And that's on top of declines over the decades. In addition, I can think of an example of the Watershed next to the State Theater. That was a beautiful bar that closed recently, and the owner explicitly cited a lack of demand. And the situation when you talk to fellow workers is that people don't have the money to go out for drinks. People don't have the
Exactly.
money to go out to eat food. to go to the movies even. We can't afford this kind of entertainment. And that really undermines our whole community when we can't afford to be a community together.
Yes, certainly. No, I remember it was actually the proprietor of the watershed who said that people could no longer afford to come to a bar
Mhm.
or enjoy music there.
That's my experience too. It's so hard coordinating as somebody who, earns less than a living wage. And a lot of my friends earn less, most of my friends earn less than a living wage. And, my friends and coworkers, when we try to coordinate, try to set something up, where would we spend time together? Well, not at my apartment because it's a dump because I can't afford a nice apartment. Not at their apartment because it's also a dump because they can't afford a nice apartment. Or it's, a half hour away, or it's all the way down in Pennsylvania because they're commuting such long distances to find work. So that's out of the question. Then we could think about going to a bar or going out for ice cream or something. But relative to what we're paid, all of that is so expensive. It's a little bit of a relief now that it's summer. We can spend time in third places like parks, go to Stewart Park, for instance. But in the winter, it's just brutal. It really represses our ability to interact socially. And I think when you're seeing statistics come up, like more and more members of Gen Z haven't been on a date. They aren't in as many friendships. People talk about the decline and death of friendship. I think it's all tied to these wage issues where we just don't have the money to live normal lives like we're otherwise accustomed to.
Right, let alone the money to go to school or
Yeah,
get medical care, which has just gotten a lot more disastrous.
it's really
As
sad. Go
as
ahead.
we discussed on our previous program, federal cuts throwing, I think it's 470,000 New Yorkers off Medicaid.
So many people I know who are working poor have medical problems that are untreated, whether it's dental problems, which a large number of people have these. They're suffering with sores in their mouths, pain constantly, real problems affecting not only their quality of life, but their health, and they can't afford to get treatment for this. But also like serious health problems, people with mental health problems who wish that they had Medicaid because it would adequately cover going to see a doctor or a therapist, but because they don't have Medicaid and because they have to pay for food for their families, for meeting the basic necessities, for their rent, they can't afford to also pay for their mental health care or for their health care, period. And this is where we see, you know, it's a well-known fact that people who are poor live much shorter lives than people who are better off. And this is where that's coming from. I've actually heard from some people regarding talk about a living wage. Well, if y'all aren't earning a living wage, how come nobody's dead? And
The
not
answer
to be,
is they
yeah,
are
people are,
dead.
yes, but also like our community is dead and our future dies as well. For an economy like ours, it's incredibly important that people have emergency funds, that people be able to save money, to purchase property, to gain equity in that property, that people be able to put aside money, think about starting a business, increasing competition for other businesses, increasing options for consumers and businesses. It's really important that people think about opportunities for education, that they're able to consider that the prospect of the debt doesn't totally deter them. All this economic empowerment is really important for these individuals in these situations, but it's also really important for our economy at large. And I think we have to ask ourselves a question eventually, what extreme are we looking for? Because in the 20th century, we saw an incredible, unprecedented economic explosion. And I think a large portion of that is attributable to the fact that in many areas, large majorities of people, privileged people, finally had the opportunity to do things like comfortably have children and raise them, have houses, put away equity, save for college educations, start businesses, things like that, which on the whole have a really positive economic effect. We created this middle class. And also this middle class drives tremendous economic demand for places like the watershed, for all sorts of goods and services. Now I see us going away from that, and we're kind of going into the direction of like the Middle Ages, where we have 10% of the economy paying for 90% of the goods currently, goods and services. That's catastrophic. And I think what we're going to see is these long-term trends of less growth and greater social unrest and unease because of this. I would also note, while I'm on this note, that's a contrast of extremes, but we can also look at more realistic contrasts when it comes to raising the minimum wage specifically. Because the minimum wage has been stuck at the federal level at $7.25 for an entire generation, we actually have tons of data about what happens when you raise the minimum wage. And if you compare a state like New York State, where the minimum wage is $16, and a state like Pennsylvania, where I believe the state minimum wage is only the federal minimum wage of $7.25, but I believe some areas have a higher local wage. It hasn't had a negative economic impact. It hasn't destroyed businesses. What this does is it just shifts the way the economy is happening, and you want to make sure that that shift happens in a way that doesn't end up oppressing small businesses, doesn't end up favoring large businesses that can handle all sorts of economic stresses and then gobble up the market from smaller businesses. That would be also catastrophic. We need to take those precautions and take them very seriously, but we need to realign our economy so that we can have a community and we can have people living and having opportunities.
Yes, I mean I think there has been a lot of studies that have shown that if a community raises its wages, jobs are not lost, because while some small businesses have to pay employees more, they also get more business. The people walking in have more money in their pockets.
Absolutely. And another positive that we would see if Ithaca or Tompkins County became an island of a slightly higher wage, and the proposals that I've seen involve the wage increasing gradually over a number of years, what we'd see over those years is increasing demand to work in Tompkins County. We would be calling people from all surrounding counties. Everybody of competence would be saying, do I want to work in a retail establishment in, Chemung County? Or do I want to work in Tompkins County where I can earn more money? And if they're qualified, they would compete for those jobs in Tompkins County. So we'd be giving Tompkins County a boost in the labor market. We'd be attracting all of the best people here for those lower paying jobs, which are currently a very large segment of the economy. Again, 50% of workers in Tompkins County are working these jobs. So already Tompkins County employs a lot of workers from out of the county, and this would only add to that. Businesses do well when they have a job market like that. It's terrible for businesses when they have a tight job market, when they can't manage to hire anybody, or they have to hire somebody who's not qualified. It's going to be great for businesses when they have that flexibility and they can take employees who are really highly qualified from the whole region.
So that's what's going on in the county legislature, a study about what the effects of raising the minimum wage for the county would be. But there is also, what shall we say, labor activity under consideration in the city of Ithaca. What is that?
So that's just cause labor protections. This is a legislative proposal that has been championed by Alderperson Jorge Defendini. He championed it in his last term, and he's doing so again in this term. The Common Council has voted to reinstate a working group to look into this legislation, where people have the opportunity to give input, and businesses and workers have given input so far. There will be several more meetings of this working group as well. But let me talk a little bit about what Just Cause is designed to do. As I understand, the proposal here is based on a law that was enacted in New York City. And the legislation there applied only to fast food workers. And what this legislation does is, several things. Once you pass a probationary period as an employee, you end up having certain termination conditions. You can't just be fired for no good reason. Instead, your employer would have to practice progressive discipline. They would have to have a disciplinary reason for getting rid of you, or they would have to have a documented bona fide economic reason, like the business is experiencing a downturn. And this is a big contrast to the norm in the United States, which itself is a big contrast to most of the Western world, and also, strangely, the state of Montana. In those places, they already practice just cause employment, and that creates a little bit of extra job stability. It means that you can't be fired for an arbitrary reason. Right now, in New York State and throughout most of the United States of America, you can be fired at any time for any reason. And if I may talk a little bit about how this impacts people's lives, these Just Cause stickers that we've been handing out. And some of them, like this one, are themed, LGBTQ themed, or this one has a trans flag theme. And that comes from, I actually know two people, one person I used to work with, another person I know who are trans, but not at work. And this is work in retail settings. They boy mode it. They pretend to be another gender than they identify as at work because they're frightened of the employment consequences of being out as a trans person at work in Ithaca, New York, in a retail establishment. That certainly should not be happening. And someone might say, well, there's already federal protections for that. There's already probably state protections for that as well. Well, they're really not accessible. If you want to file a complaint with the State Department of Labor, the turnaround time for that is literally like 2 years. If you're a poor person working, for these terrible wages at a retail employer, living a high stress life, barely making ends meet, if they fire you, the last thing that you can entertain seriously in your life is like going to a lawyer and going through a complicated process to try to navigate that. It's really unrealistic. But what this Just Cause proposal would do would be to establish a local commission, which would consist of workers, community members, including workers and I guess employers as well. You would go before the commission and you could present your case. You could say, I don't have a disciplinary history at this workplace. In fact, if you look at my performance evaluation, it says I meet expectations, but I was fired when I went out as a trans person. And then what you could get out of that is potentially reinstatement to your position or financial compensation, depending on what the panel decided. So that's a real sea change. It not only affects minorities who might get discriminated against and whose protection is increasingly theoretical, it would also protect people who are organizing. Very frequently, people who are interested in union organizing are fired. And there may be some trumped up reasons for their firing, or maybe they're not given a reason at all for their firing. Those cases could be reviewed in this case, and that worker might be entitled to reinstatement or compensation. And this is so important. We've seen this steady march in Ithaca of increasing organizing, of increasing unionization, and that has benefited workers tremendously. If you look at the deal that teachers got last year, if you look at the deal that nurses have gotten, it's really a positive sort of change. We want to see more of that happen and at more levels. And Just Cause protection would really enable that, would allow workers to talk about organizing. I can't imagine, like, one of the things you're entitled to under federal law is to have an organizing meeting in the break room of your workplace outside of work hours. I cannot imagine doing that as a retail employee. Guaranteed you would be fired or there would be consequences against you. And then trying to navigate the Federal Department of Labor, I don't think that you're going to really have that much success going against your employer with the Trump administration on your side. But to have this commission there behind you, for them to be able to say, hey, workers are allowed to do that, and you can't retaliate by firing them in a case like that, that would be a sea change.
Yes, decades ago, I was suddenly dismissed from a job. I was told I was teaching English as a second language. I was told that a student had complained about something in my teaching. Not really a big surprise because those students came from lots of different, often very privileged backgrounds.
Mm-hmm.
And, were just used to different things. I mean, on their background, I remember one of them asking me for some advice about how to write to the manager, address the manager of a company, and I gave a suggestion, and he said, "No, but I'm the son of the owner." So you can see
Yeah.
what privilege was there.
That's an interesting example because ITA members in Ithaca, unionized teachers, they do have just cause employment. So under their union agreement, so if you were, your job was threatened as a teacher for an inadequate reason like that, you could go to the union
Yeah.
and seek redress and reappointment. That's an important protection for teachers, and it would be an important protection for all workers.
Yeah. Vis-a-vis Cornell, which was the overall employer, and supposedly one of those big employers that have very adequate, protections for their workforce. The guy who fired me said that they didn't have money. Now, that was to my advantage because I was able to get unemployment insurance
Hmm.
quite easily that way. But a few months later, since this is a small community, I happened to meet the person who replaced me, and that was the key. What I realized, a stunning Scandinavian blonde.
Oh, God.
Yeah, I think that was the original motive.
Yeah.
Let's get her into the workplace.
Yeah. So we definitely need to avoid things like that happening to people. People do get fired in retail jobs, especially for how they look or how they dress, even when they're on dress code, even when they look fine, just because the manager disagrees with it. And you mentioned finances a moment ago. Like, look, this issue has been portrayed by some in the business community as like a workers versus businesses issue. But the Chamber of Commerce in Tompkins County noted in one Common Council meeting that it costs the average business $7,000 to bring on a new worker. So turnover at businesses is really expensive. And having been a retail worker for many years and a retail manager, it's really, really difficult. It's hard to go through all this turnover. Yet businesses experience these really high rates of turnover. Some of that is driven by the wage situation. People aren't that committed to these jobs that don't even pay them enough to live. But some of that is driven by a lot of arbitrary or unnecessary firings that really interrupt the lives of workers, but also screw up the business. We often think of regulations as something that harms businesses. Like, oh, if you just had less regulations, you'd have better business. But if you think about like the aviation industry, the pharmaceutical industry, the automotive industry, these are gigantic, massive industries, and they're bigger than they've ever been because of how they're regulated, because the government regulates them for success. Your plane has to fly and not fall out of the sky. Your pharmaceutical theoretically actually has to work. This would be holding businesses to a standard to which effective businesses already hold themselves. If you're working for most large businesses, they'll have HR policies in place that talk about progressive discipline, that mandate that you have to get written warnings, that it has to go through a process before you're fired. So you're not fired arbitrarily, and that you can't be fired for, some trumped up or unnecessary reason, at least in theory. Businesses adopt those practices because they're good for business, because they minimize unnecessary turnover, because they, help create stronger teams. So I really disagree with some of the sentiment from certain business leaders in the community that this is something that would be negative for businesses. I think this would only be a positive thing for businesses as well as for workers.
Yeah, well, in my case, there wasn't any $7,000 retraining cost because a graduate student was picked up to replace me
So
and I had to brief him.
that's the worst.
Well, let's just say a few words about the process that this council committee is going through. They meet on the fourth Wednesday of each month
Mhm.
at 6 o'clock in council chambers. So a lot like the common council meetings. This is in City Hall on East Green Street. Meetings begin with public comment, and I think they plan some outreach even beyond those meetings.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with all the details of those plans, but the opportunity for public comment and the discussion in those meetings has been really invaluable. And anybody who is interested, I'd strongly encourage to go there and make a statement of your own. I think the reason why we're talking about legislative issues here today and legislative issues in the city of Ithaca is that we have a real opportunity. There are a lot of people on Common Council who identify as socialists and who align with IDSA, uh, even including the mayor himself. However, I don't think anybody has interest in governing without consensus. So there is a draft legislation for this, and hypothetically, it could be brought to vote and maybe passed, given that support I just mentioned. But the purpose of the working group is to take a closer look at the potential effects of this legislation on businesses and workers in the community, and try to fine tune it to make it one that works for Ithaca.
Well, thank you, Michael Demo. We have been talking about two current labor issues before different legislative bodies in this county. This has been Ithaca DSA Presents. I'm Theresa Alt. Thanks for watching.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3.